Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Mackenzie Smith, the University Librarian here at UC Davis and one of the triumvirate who has organized this conference for you. Jonathan asked to have a little break from the proceedings, so I'm going to be introducing the sessions this morning, starting with an introductory keynote talk this morning from Diane Harley. Diane is a professor at UC Berkeley, working for the Center for Studies in Higher Education. She will be explaining more about herself, her background, and her talk. So she has asked me not to give you a long bio, and I will respect that request and turn things over to her. So please join me in welcoming Diane.
Thank you. Thank you to all the organizers for inviting me to participate in really a fascinating meeting. I've been in this business for about 20 years, and technology and higher education policy. And
Pause.
oh,
Is she audible in the back? No. I think the microphone isn't on, or it's very, very faint.
okay. Can you hear me now?
Jonathan will go, if you speak loudly, we'll try and get it fixed.
Okay.
Sorry.
Can you hear me better now? Okay. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me to participate in this meeting. It's been fascinating for me. I am at the Center for Studies in Higher Education. I am a researcher, not a professor, and that's an interesting story all in and of itself with regards to advancement issues. I'm an anthropologist by training. I've been working in technology and higher education policy for about 20 years, so I am fascinated to see how the conversations evolve and how many things change and how many things stay the same. I've got a pretty full set of slides. I'm going to see what I can get through today in my time. I want to leave time for Q&A. There was so much rich conversation yesterday. I'd like to touch on some of the issues that were raised. Today I want to describe some of the factors underlying the slow rate of change in scholarly communication practices. And these aren't technical issues. I want to discuss incentives and motivations in decisions about disseminating research. And if I have time, I'd like to make some suggestions for moving from rhetoric to empirical research that can inform policy and investment decisions. The work I'm going to talk about today has been generously funded by the Andrew Mellon Foundation, and I have to say they've given me and my researchers an immense amount of freedom. This is all a team effort. Our premise is that you have to talk to scholars if you're interested in academic values and scholarly communication practices. We set out early on in 2005, which is 10 years ago almost. We wanted to distinguish between archival publishing and what we call in-progress publishing. I'm an anthropologist. I'm not a publisher. I'm not a software developer. I'm not a librarian. I'm a researcher. I do empirical research. I'd like to say I don't make the news. I only report it. So what I'm going to be describing to you today is not so much my opinion as what I have heard from the faculty and other stakeholders that we have talked to. Our motivations and approach are to assess the criteria by which faculty decide when and in what venues to communicate the results of scholarly research at all stages. We want to analyze the roles universities and faculty play in the resolution of the perceived crises in scholarly communication. And there are a lot of different crises in scholarly communication. The humanists have their crisis, and the science fields have theirs. Disciplinary traditions and culture matter a lot. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking to you about various norms of publication in about 6 or 7 disciplines. What we've found is that there's a dichotomous situation. Electronic forms of print and other publications are consumed heavily. Perceptions and the perceptions and realities of the reward system you have a strong adherence to conventional high-stature publications as record for reporting research and having it evaluated institutionally. This isn't any big news to you, but I want to talk to you a little bit about how this process unfolds at research universities. Promotion depends, excuse me, I have a frog this morning. Promotion depends predominantly upon final, fully peer-reviewed, archival publication, and I think it's important to remember that in the arts, professional schools, different products are evaluated, and that in and of itself, I think, provides us with lots of examples of where there is flexibility in these systems. Making a reputation is also dependent on where one publishes, plus on in-progress activities, conferences, service, public engagement, technical contributions, and so on. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about those sort of gradations. Just to channel Victoria, I think methods are really important. All of our work is published on our website. It's on my slides. You can Google it. Everything's open access. We have a pretty extensive section on all of our research reports on methods. Just quickly, so you know what I'm talking about and what I'm not talking about. We focused on research universities primarily. We talked formally to 160 plus scholars. We did 12 disciplinary case studies, and we did a lot of literature reviews, a lot of attendance of meetings such as this, and a lot of background research. There was a planning project. The fields that we looked at in that were anthropology, biostatistics, chemical engineering, law and economics, and English language literature. The larger project, we focused on astrophysics, archaeology, biology, economics, history, music, and political science. There was no perfect set of disciplines. Money is finite, time is finite, and we chose these very carefully. We did a lot of scanning of what fields would be the most interesting from the point of view of the affordances that they offered in terms of working with new technologies, thinking about new ways of communicating research. We talked to tenured, pre-tenure, postdoc graduate students, high-level administrators, editors, publishers, librarians, and as I said, you can look at the methods in the reports. We had very long interview protocols, but the 7 basic questions we asked every individual that we interviewed. Issues around tenure and promotion and making a name for yourself, your criteria for disseminating research at various stages, publication practices, new publication outlets, new genres. Sharing, this was very, very important to me in particular. When we started out on this, Web 2.0, there was a lot of buzz about it. Millennials are going to change the world. And it was very important for us to figure out what scholars felt about sharing, when they shared, what they shared, with whom they shared. We talked about collaboration, the resources they created and consumed, their needs, public engagement, and the future. In a nutshell, and I could probably stop right here, the primary drivers of faculty behavior from our perspective are career advancement, moving the field forward, and receiving credit and attribution. Faculty have certain expectations around scholarly communication. They assume access to other scholarship will be provided and the costs will be covered by the institution or someone else. They don't want to slog through DREC. They need and use peer review as a filtering mechanism. They want relative speed to publication. This is quite disciplinary specific. And the highest prestige outlet as possible, given the nature of what is being published and the targeted audience for that particular piece of research. Open access is not necessarily an issue for many. Audience and prestige are often more important. Faculty and scholars want their work protected from rip-off, and they want to receive credit. They want high-quality publications. They want high-quality editorial production, values, visibility, persistence. All of this costs money. I don't need to tell the librarians and the publishers that. back-end data support in some fields is also very important. Now, I'm just going to do a whirlwind tour through, I think it's 6 or 7 fields. So you get a sense, because the conversations, at least many of the conversations that I've had, it's like, why can't we all be like the economists, or why can't we all be like the astrophysicists or the physicists and use the archive or SSRN, because that's not the way it works. Now, will it evolve to that? We'll see. It hasn't yet. So it's interesting in computer science that peer-reviewed conference proceedings are the most prestigious archival outlet. Lots of different interesting products that computer science creates, including software. History and archaeology, qualitative poli-sci, languages and media studies rely heavily on the book or the monograph for long arguments. And this is remarkably resistant to change, even though journal articles are often used for shorter arguments, book reviews. And it was interesting, I was on a panel of esteemed media studies scholars, and I thought, okay, media studies, man, they're going to be really pushing the envelope. To a person, they were all publishing a book. And I don't know what you make of that. Musicology was an interesting field because it includes, under its umbrella is art historical studies of Western music, computer composition, ethnomusicology, and music theory. And each one of those subdisciplines has very different ways and norms for communicating scholarship. And finally, in molecular and cell biology, and perhaps other sciences such as chemistry that are fast-moving, well-funded, highly competitive, and have commercial potential, there's much more limited range of outlets, and it's journals, journal articles, although numerically many more journals in subfields. I think I'll stop with that. I do want to say that society journals, and we heard this from a lot of scholars, that have scholar editors as opposed to professional editors, which is typical of, say, Nature or Cell, those were the most trusted. And we heard a lot about this. We heard a lot about potato chip articles in Science and Nature and how it was driving science in negative ways, that scientists needed to be able to have places where they could present longer arguments. Preprint servers are rare, but maybe that is changing, as we heard yesterday. So when Don Waters at Mellon approached us and we were talking about what we would do, I told him, you know, I really don't want to do anything on I don't want to do peer review. It's just too fraught. So we didn't really, in our protocols, if you look at the protocols which are published on our website, when we asked where faculty publish and why and how faculty are judged in promotion, we really didn't ask about peer review, but we heard it again and again and again and again, peer review, peer review, peer review, peer review. It's the value system supporting assessment of and perceived quality of research. It's the primary mechanism through which research is nurtured and made both effective and efficient. It's the primary mechanism and an excellent quality filter for the proliferating mass of scholarly information on the web. And we heard this again and again and again in all fields, that it's impossible to keep up with the proliferation of publications in many forms. I think it's going to get worse. Will it be the necessity of more formal gatekeeping embodied in the current publishing system? Other systems? We'll find out. Oops. Okay. Let me make sure I didn't. So peer review and the advancement process. There's a heavy reliance on peer-reviewed publications to aid institutional TMP committees and external reviewers in evaluation of scholarly work, and I really need to emphasize the importance of external reviewers. The most damning thing that could happen to a scholar is if an external reviewer says, who? High-impact publications are a way of making a name. New journals, new genres are acceptable if they're peer-reviewed. There are worries that lack of peer review is associated with newer, untested forms of publication. So any scholar going through an advancement process is going to have to explain why his or her dossier includes non-traditional forms and how those non-traditional forms have indeed been peer-reviewed. Written policy, spoken policy is that the advancement process can and should be supportive and unprejudiced of non-traditional publishing models. Does actual practice vary? I mean, that's a very difficult research question because these are personnel decisions, and we discussed among ourselves whether or not it would be possible at all to get files of what our Tenure and Promotion Committee decisions, and I think it's probably impossible. So generally, though, chairs, deans, provosts report seeing few alternatives to traditional scholarship in tenure and promotion dossiers at highly competitive universities. The young leading the way is a mythology. That's a question. People ask me what was the most surprising thing I found early on in our research, and it was, wow, I really thought young scholars would be more innovative. Young scholars are exceptionally conservative and hew to the norms set by their mentors. These are individuals that have been, they've been probably very good undergraduates, they've been very good graduate students, postdocs. They have been groomed and acclimated to a very competitive academic environment. So it's not as if they just change when they get hired as an assistant professor. Extensive public engagement, data curation, et cetera, may be best left until after tenure. We heard this again and again and again. An individual senior faculty member would say, yeah, I really don't encourage an assistant professor to spend a lot of time doing anything but teaching and publishing. Okay, I'm not going to do this entire slide, but I want to point out the ubiquity of peer review in the lives of scholars. What is that little thing there? I'm afraid to touch anything. Can I? I don't have my glasses on. Oh, that's okay. We'll get back. Nope? Okay. Thank you for being my eyes. There's developmental peer review, which is an informal process, feedback on work in progress from informal networks, laboratory discussions, sharing drafts with colleagues, internal wikis, blogs, and you can make a list a mile long. Pre-publication peer review, which is more formal, invited talks, symposia, and various size conferences, preprint servers, web pages. Publication-based peer review, and they're very different models, single, double-blind, and so on. Post-publication peer review can be formal and informal. Book reviews, performance reviews, letters to the editor, later citations, and so on. The peer review of data and other scholarly products. Institutional peer review in tenure and promotion cases, which takes up a lot of time of scholars. Peer review for grants and funding. And cumulative peer review over a career, evaluations for prizes, memberships, and so on. So really, peer review is what scholars do all the time. And it's a lot of work. I'm just going to briefly mention this meeting and the publication that resulted from it. Peer review in academic promotion and publishing, we convened a very interesting group of individuals to talk about the problems in peer review, what some of the solutions might be. I don't need to tell you there are many perceived problems with peer review. Andrew Abbott has a wonderful paper that describes sort of the history of kvetching about peer review. Finding good reviewers can be a challenge. The system is overwhelmed. It's exceptionally costly to the institution to subsidize peer review via faculty salaries. Concerns about, 10 minutes? Concerns about citation metrics, can they be gamed, are they always accurate or not, fraud detection, and so on. There are concerns that tenure and promotion committees rely too heavily on the proxy of imprimatur and citation metrics. Publications as a proxy for assessing scholarship follows from the exponential growth and resulting compartmentalization of knowledge across the academy, which has meant that individuals within a faculty can no longer effectively review the work of their peers. So we have all sorts of secondary indicators: where you published, what the impact factor was. One thing that I don't think has been discussed here, and I'm not sure if any of you are thinking about it, but the publication expectations at research universities, 2 books in the humanities, N articles in particular outlets in the sciences, they trickle down from research universities to aspirant institutions, including in the United States, but also internationally. The imperative to rise in international league tables or international rankings is really very, very strong, and it's a world that is quite scary, actually, because it's driving behavior in negative ways. There's an explosion of low-quality publications. You know, we hear the words arm race, inflationary currency, peer review, and reviewers are being swamped. The question is if it's an economically sustainable system. So we came up with a lot of recommendations in this report. And among those recommendations was to improve peer review and tenure promotion and grant making, to reduce the reliance on secondary indicators and emphasis on quantity versus quality. Very important that review committees are reading a candidate's tenure promotion dossier and shun impact factors and other bibliometrics as primary indicators of the quality of that scholar's work. One of the recommendations that we made was that individually we must model good publication practices for our younger scholars that benefit society and the academy. And we also agreed that vigilance is required against cabals and echo chambers that can happen in traditional peer review and also in some of the new forms that are arising. We also recommended that there be a limit to what goes through the peer review process and encourage new forms of publication for work deemed more ephemeral and of lower impact. And I think some of the platforms that we're seeing in the new publishing models that are being discussed here and elsewhere provide an opportunity to have those alternative outlets for more ephemeral work. I think I can get through this. I want to talk a little bit about publish and filter and discuss a little bit about sharing what with whom and when. What we found is early half-baked work is universally not shared. The young scholars are particularly cautious about sharing in-progress work. What we found is a pattern of first with a trusted circle of colleagues, a modicum of privacy is needed, conferences, seminars are very important, and the public posting of working papers, which is different from posting preprints or postprints, is sort of the next step. And those are generally not posted until it's been vetted by an inner circle, that it's reached a certain level of excellence, and we heard the word a lot, well, I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want something to get out there into the ether, be embarrassed, have to retract it. Somebody across the world has decided that this is the version. Personality, discipline, and career stage are important in terms of sharing behavior. Some people are sharers, and some aren't. I'm not going to, I think I've covered that. So I just want to leave you with how new genres, non-traditional scholarly products, data blogs, websites, tool building, et cetera, are going to be peer reviewed, and who will do it. Our peer review already takes an immense amount of time. I have real skepticism about open peer review as being a particularly, I'm not sure we can depend on that. I want to talk too about data sharing and getting credit for data publication. This is an interesting quote. If data sets were cited, they would achieve a validity and significance within the cycle of activities associated with scholarly communication and recognition of scholarly effort. There's an assumption in this statement that data, standing alone without both an interpretive layer, such as an article or a book, and having been peer-reviewed, will be weighted the same as articles and books in tenure and promotion decisions. I don't think that's going to happen. I think because I hope I've made the point that what committees want to see, whatever it is that it's been peer-reviewed, and it's been peer-reviewed well. I also want to mention some interesting changing journal policies. The Journal of Neuroscience announced its decision to cease the publication of supplementary data, citing two main reasons. Reviewers cannot realistically spend the time necessary to review that material closely. And second, critical information on data or methods can be lost in a giant supplementary data package. Another, at about the same time in 2011, Enough is Enough, a journal of experimental medicine, complaints about the overabundance of supplementary information in primary research articles have increased in decibel and frequency in the past several years and are now at cacophonous levels. Reviewers and editors warn they do not have time to scrutinize it. Authors contend that the effort and money needed to produce it exceeds that reasonably spent on a single publication. How often readers actually look at supplemental information is unclear, and most journal websites offer the supplement as an optional download. So I'll end there. I'm on the panel, the next panel, and I have a variety of research questions that I think would be useful for all of us to think about engaging in, and I include the commercial entities as well. I think the more data we have about how scholars are working, how they're being evaluated, would be very useful in policy and investment decisions. Thank you.
Did the people who were talking so much about the value of peer review also talk about the unsustainability of peer review? Because I hear the same words coming out of two sides of everyone's mouth.
Absolutely.
Don't give me any more, but I absolutely have to be peer reviewed.
Absolutely.
So what did you conclude from that?
Well, I conclude that scholars are, like many of us, self-centered. You know, it's career advancement. It's for me. I think most scholars realize it's important. I think most scholars are very aware of the problems with it. But I don't, you know, it's the democracy. It's like democracy.
So I guess in...
I don't know how else to answer that.
Right. I mean, it's just a dilemma.
Yeah, it's a dilemma.
In other areas of the world, I think one strategy has been to just limit how much has to happen. Is one peer review enough? Does it have to be 3, you know, so that you can get it down to something tractable? And then this notion of paying for peer review, I don't think this is working, but in neuroscience in particular, I know they're starting to think about paying for peer review because MDs get a lot of money for their time, and they're not going to do it anymore for no money.
Economists do that as well.
Yeah.
There are a number of fields and subfields that actually do pay pittances, but do pay.
It's symbolic. Yeah. So is that a strategy that might...
I think so. I mean, one of the things that we discussed in the meeting that I referenced on peer review was because of this sense of being overwhelmed with the sheer volume of peer review, that maybe a quid pro quo with, our institution will review your people, get a consortium going where people are exchanging peer review. So do you want me to pick?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think Josh, you had your hand up first.
Thank you. Very interesting talk. A couple. Let's see if this works. I have a couple of questions. One of them has to do with some other things that I would have thought would have shown up in some of the disciplines that you were looking at. For example, in the sciences, did anybody talk about sponsored research funding? I mean, in some sense, maybe this is lexicographic. You have to have funding if you're in chemistry or engineering or other fields, and you simply can't. It doesn't matter what you've produced in publications if you aren't funded.
Absolutely.
So I wasn't sure if you just sort of leave that out as secondary or how that relates to.
Oh, I think it drives.
Broader peer review. And then the other set of issues have to do with commercialization. Are there fields where we're having patents or licensing income are regarded as being equivalent to peer review publication, or are most people, in fact, not really paying attention?
Well, and I didn't make this as clear as I would like, perhaps. When you submit your dossier, there are lots of different categories. At Berkeley, one of the first ones is prizes, Nobel. It's a little intimidating. But there's a whole section on teaching. There's a whole section on service. I mean, all sorts. So patents. I mean, I don't know what the category is, but yeah, all of that stuff gets. It's a suite of achievements, anchored by a strong publication record. Oh, okay. So I think Victoria, and then I'll move this way.
So I wanted to raise an issue as a counterpoint in some fields where they don't actually engage in peer review, and yet they seem to be producing, at least in my estimation, a very scholarly research and very sophisticated intellectual research, and I'm thinking primarily of law. And so that might be a counterpoint to some of the discussion, and I was interested in your thoughts on this because somehow they're managing to do this, or maybe there are gaps that are, we wouldn't accept, say, for example, if that was a practice in another field other than law. I don't know. But there are these sort of very different practices in these different fields. And so peer review is, your work shows that many academics take that as for granted absolutely essential and necessary, and yet there are sort of other points.
Law journals are edited by students. We know that. I'm not sure I mean, Yochai, I can't believe his book wasn't peer reviewed. Yeah, I think there, and that's why I wanted to present that array of kinds of peer review. That it's not just that public, that's one piece of all the peer review that a scholar engages in and is affected by. But I think your point is very good, which there are so many variations in how you can get this done, depending on discipline. I mean, architecture is very fascinating. Peer review, well, if you win prizes, that's a form of peer review. But there's no publication, it's a design.
So, because it doesn't look like the microphone.
No, it's now turned up.
Okay.
Does it work? Yeah.
Oh. Excuse me.
One quick comment to Josh's question. I've seen that in Europe, in some cases, especially in Germany, patents are listed as publications. So they're not listed under patents.
Okay.
And the argument is that they've been reviewed, though it's technically not a peer review, but it's an ex parte review. So, but they're treated as peer review. So the question is that you kind of mentioned open open peer review, and you said, I don't think that's going to be the solution. Can you expand on that?
Well, okay. I think that there may be the hope, at least that's what I've interpreted it as, that we can just throw stuff up there and people are going to randomly comment on it. I don't think people have time for that, and I skipped over that slide. I've done scans of publish first, review, filter later. Have you ever done a scan of the comments on those articles? They're vanishingly small. Vanishingly. Now, there have been some, excuse me, interesting experiments in the humanities. One of the messages that came from one in particular, the Shakespeare Quarterly, was that it takes an immense amount of time to organize open peer review. Was it effective? Was it useful? Yeah, but is it a sustainable practice? And I think we're going to work it out. There may be some fields, some subfields, some scholarly communities that decide that that's an effective way to operate. But throwing it out there for random comments on the web, we did that for a paper we did in, New Media, I forget the name of the journal. I was underwhelmed by the comments that we received.
Just a super quick follow-up. I was asking because in the case of open patent review, there have been some pilot projects that actually have been quite successful.
Oh, okay. I've only heard about that. Yeah.
Whether in that case it works because people have a strong motivation to try to kill the patent.
Maybe.
So they put in the time and say, by the way, this patent is not original, there is this prior art.
Yeah.
So whether in that case it works because of
Yeah, interesting.
motivation.
Yeah, interesting. But again, I think if we start teasing out how the academy functions across all disciplines, you're going to find these very interesting adaptations, if you will, to how we review ourselves, how we get information out there. And I look at that as an opportunity. I mean, one of the interesting things about archaeology, about music, taking those cases, is they are highly interdisciplinary. And that zooarchaeologists are going to communicate quite differently than a vanilla archaeologist who has to do a monograph.
I think we're going to have to end there, but Diane is going to be on the panel following this next session, so you can continue to ask questions then and then
And I'll be, yeah, there's a break, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So please join me in thanking Diane.
Thank you.